Daniel, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to come and visit with us today. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's honestly very inspiring and energizing to be with all of you. I got to listen to your conversation with President Bush. Gave me a lot of hope for the potential of our country to really, really move forward.
Thank you. You've been an entrepreneur from a very young age. One of the things in PLS that we always like to do when we have guest speakers is ask them about the stories that really motivated them and galvanized their core values in the things that they pursue. So what inspired your entrepreneurial spirit?
That's actually probably one of the hardest questions that I get asked that I don't have a perfect answer to. My father was an entrepreneur, so maybe I learned it from him. Maybe I was born with it. Maybe my father was a Holocaust survivor, and maybe it was a little bit of that sense that I needed to develop skills to, in really challenging circumstances, to overcome that and to be entrepreneurial. But I don't know, I just enjoyed it. When I was a kid, I was doing magic shows when I was 8 years old, and then I was organizing the cousins to organize like little street fairs, and then I was selling watches, flea markets and kiosks, and and if any of you guys have a watch warranty issue that you bought from me, please wait till after this thing ends.
So what was your best magic trick?
My best magic, well, in the last 10 years, have gotten into mentalism, so I really, really like to get into your guys' brains, but we'll do that on another occasion. Right now, the easy stuff that I just showed to the strategic guys is I can take something like this and then go like that. And then if I really go hard, it can just disappear completely. Thank you. The problem is that now for the rest of the day, I have to stick here because I hit that thing here. Like, so.
Another PLS first. This is the first magic.
It tends to be a problem for the magicians. If you see us very rigid like this all the time, we're hiding something. And my wife always jokes, like, I don't know if you guys saw the 40-Year Virgin or that movie, where the guy like produces an ear out of a plastic ear, and the girl that says, that means you've been carrying a plastic ear in your pocket all day long. And like, yeah, we are nerds after all.
First magic trick ever in PLS, so congratulations for that. Yeah. So another key aspect of our program is we spent some time talking about different characteristics of effective leadership, and one of them is having a clear vision and sharing that vision. And we look back at the things that you've done and look back at peace work and your work with Kind, and those business ventures clearly for you had a vision that were based on more than just the bottom line.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you could share with everyone the thought process. Where's that come from? Where you say, I want to start a business, but it's not going to be just about profit. There's going to be some social good baked into that effort.
Well, that was luck, and I'll tell you how I got there. But the part that was inside me was from the very beginning. Building bridges is probably the common thread in everything I've ever done, including in business and in civic work. I've created a lot of civic initiatives. And it's not hard to guess that's connected to my learning when I was 9 years old about what my father went through in a concentration camp, and him starting to talk to me about it, and my mom listening to how he's saying horrible things, and she's saying, Roman, he's 9 years old, please, why are you telling him this? And he says, he's 9 years old and he needs to hear it. I was 9 years old when I needed to live through it. But very, very importantly, he didn't only talk about the horrors of what he went through, he also talked about the kindness that helped him survive. And I don't know, because I wasn't there, whether it really was a descriptive facet of what he lived through or what he chose his narrative to be, because all of us as human beings have the power to create our own narratives. And his narrative was horrible inhumanity, but amidst all of that darkness, light and kindness from heroes that saved his life. And it included a German soldier that when nobody was watching, threw a potato by his feet. But included some horrible circumstances. I'll tell you another story. When he was around 10 or 11, the war had started, and the superintendent of the building said, "Are you hungry? Do you want some food?" And my dad said, yes. And he brought my dad downstairs, and he pointed them to a pile of dead bodies, and he said, "Those are Jews. Why don't you just take a bite out of one of them?" And this person that was not a kind person, a year and a half later, or at some point later, the paramilitary forces rounded out all the Jewish families, and they killed all of the Jewish families. And then there was one last family standing, which was my family. And they went to my family's apartment. My dad was interviewed in the 1980s about this, and there's a video on my YouTube channel, in case any of you guys wants to see it, where he talks about this. But they took my grandmother in the back. They probably raped her. He didn't quite understand that as a kid, but he connected the dots later. Then they took them downstairs, and as they were aiming their guns to kill them, the superintendent whispered something into the head of the paramilitary forces, which prompted them to leave. And he looked at my grandfather and he said, "Mr. Lubetzky, I just told them to leave you because you were kind to me. And every morning you look at my eyes and you treated me well, and you shook my hand, and you treated me with humanity. And on the holidays you gave me my bottle of schnapps, and you just treated me well. So they've spared you, I've spared you, but leave before we change our mind." And that night they had to go into a ghetto. But for me, the reason that story is both harrowing and important to me is because this guy was not a good person. Like, what type of person does that to a 10-year-old kid? But at that critical moment, he saw the humanity of someone that had treated him with kindness, and he spared this family's life. And for me, that story is an essential story for all of humanity, given what's going on today in the Middle East, given what's going on today across the world with so much dehumanization, so much polarization, so much ease because of the social media echo chambers and algorithms for us to just empathize with our side without connecting with the other side, or as President Bush talked with his point about the gigabytes. I have to say President Bush is a genius, because the way he is so self-effacing, it allows him to have so much moral authority but get through to us without sounding like he's not preaching, right? He's just connecting with us as human beings. And for all of the presidential scholars and me, it's a lesson about maintaining our humility as a tool for us to be able to carry the importance of our message. Because if we're all going to unite here at the PLS and all of us join forces in building a better future that's rooted in a little bit more compassion, a little bit more curiosity, a little bit more courage, less unforgiving judgmentalism, more cooperation, more listening, less know-it-allism. I think I invented that one like this. You know? I think it's really going to be important for us to learn those skill sets. I forgot what question you had asked me.
No, you nailed it. So part of it is
piecework,
how those experiences shape that value and that vision.
Yeah, but so the
selling that vision
concept
too.
of building bridges was there always, but the practical question you asked about pieceworks, it was just luck. I was studying here in Texas at Trinity University in San Antonio. My thesis was on the influence of economics in resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict, and it was a 268-page document, and it was very, very popular among doctors, because if you had difficulty falling asleep, they would give it to you, and you'd fall asleep immediately. It was just so theoretical. But then from there I went to, thank you, David, for laughing. But then in law school I wrote about a legislative proposal for how to use economics to bring people together. And I went to the Middle East to research that. And as I was researching it, I had the idea for what became my first company, Peaceworks. We use business as a force for bringing people together. So we started ventures between Palestinians, Israelis, Jordanians, Egyptians, Turks, neighbors striving to coexist, shattering stereotypes as they discovered each other's humanity, creating vested interest in building something positive together rather than dividing, destroying, or diminishing, which is the goal of violent extremists. Builders instead unite, build, and bring light to the world. And that is fundamentally our challenge for civilization. It's not for us to just check the point of this is a friend, this is an enemy. That's very dangerous. The overwhelming majority of Muslims and Jews, Palestinians and Israelis, people on the left and on the right, want a better future for the children. They would be okay coexisting with the other side if they knew that they're going to be treated with respect and dignity, freedom and security. And we need to find a way to make sure that all of us understand that and all of us join forces to do that abroad and here. You know, the Ukrainian conflict with Putin trying to destabilize Ukraine and to invade and take over part of Ukraine, the conflict in the Middle East, the conflicts here, they're all connected with that understanding of builders versus destroyers. And the overwhelming majority of people are moderates. Any data that you will look at, the Starts With Us movement that Danielle is part of, that she and I work on, this is what this pin is about, Starts With Us shared some data that 86% of Americans are moderates. But I've seen surveys that it's more like, depending on how you define it, 93, 94%. Very, very small number of people are extremists. But then the number of people that are violent extremists is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%. It's a very, very tiny fraction. But the challenge is that even if the extremists are 6 to 13%, they're very passionate. They wake up in the morning and think, how can I advance my cause? And the moderates, 86 to 93%, they wake up in the morning, they're like, what can I have for breakfast? And as long as we, right, that's another one, David, from my inventory. But as long as we are passive, we're not going to win. Moderates need to become builders. So they need to have the action and the purpose to build together. And then we can turn that tiny percentage of extremists into people that can join us. But as long as we don't lead, we're basically creating a void for voices of extremism in all of our societies to take over.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up for questions from our alumni. But I'd like for you to continue talking about Starts With Us. You know, one of the foundations of PLS is we work very, very hard to invite the most dramatically heterogeneous group of people that we can find who are all committed to making their communities better in however they define community. And so every year we have 60 people in a cohort who look at the world very differently, define problems differently based on their perspectives, maybe look at the same problem but think of different solutions for it. And we see a real value in that. With Start With Us, you're looking at the cultural and political divide in this country. Can you just share with everyone sort of your thoughts behind that movement and what you're hoping to accomplish and the ways you're going about doing that?
Yeah, I want to give you a tiny bit more background. When I came to the United States in 1984 from Mexico, I discovered a country where people could disagree with one another, but then they were friends at night, and they found a way to work across the aisle. Yesterday, I was walking with Larry Wright, who's a very well-respected journalist in Texas, and he told me that his favorite, and he's a very progressive Democrat, and he told me that his favorite time in Texas politics was when President Bush was Governor Bush, and he had bipartisan support from the speaker and the deputy and the lieutenant governor who were Democrats, and they worked across the aisle together and really put the country, the state in a positive direction, and they were able to work across the aisle. But that's the United States that I immigrated to. The thought that I would be worried about preserving American democracy and about ensuring that we all work together as Americans, I would have never imagined that. In fact, I thought that my way that I was going to contribute was by trying to contribute to building bridges in the Middle East. So after Peace Works, I built a movement called One Voice, together with a Palestinian counterpart, a friend of mine named Mohammed Darawshe. We built a movement that today is the largest movement, not just on the Israeli side, but on the Palestinian side, not just in the West Bank, but in Gaza, where we have altogether north of 1 million people that have joined the movement to affirm that we need to give voice to moderates, to seize back the agenda for conflict resolution away from violent absolutism. And over the last 5-10 years, I started getting really scared about what I was witnessing happening in our country. And it took me a long time, because I'm a little slow, to connect the dots that what we did in one voice in the Middle East was deeply necessary here. And it's not identical, but we ended up creating Starts With Us as a movement that, frankly, when you look at the principles of PLS and Starts With Us, they're very, very much aligned. I encourage you all to join us. Go to startswith.us as a website, or look us up on any of the social media and join it. Or you can go to Daniel Lubetzky, the social media, and connect through all of the different channels. But it's the same values that I've been talking about trying to give people a toolkit to become problem solvers, finding different ways that we can navigate differences, create a hearty debate culture, respect where people are coming from. What I love about your group is that it spans a different spectrum of beliefs, politics, ethnicities, religions, etc., because it's essential that people across lines of difference, that's, in my opinion, what makes this country so amazing and what makes us have that incredible potential, the pluralism of helping people from all walks of life contribute something different and make us so much stronger. And it's not theoretical, it's real. Like, Kind, the company, became what it became because we created that culture where no matter if you were an entry-level team member that just graduated from college, or the janitor, or the president, everybody had a voice, and everybody was encouraged to challenge conventional wisdom and to debate with respect, but heartily. And that's what makes the American enterprise system work. That's what makes America as a democracy work. That's what made us such an incredible country, the ability to debate things with respect, with kindness, but with authenticity. And that is basically the principle of Starts With Us. We have about 250 founding partners, including will.i.am, the musician, Jose Andres, the chef, Mark Cuban, the business and fellow Shark Tank dude. And then it has like an incredible roster of like Dr. Bernice King, Lonnie Ali from the Muhammad Ali Center. Just like incredible, from Erskine Bowles, who was the chief of staff to President Clinton, to Karl Rove, the former advisor to Bush. It has a broad spectrum of beliefs, but all joining with the understanding that we need to use more compassion, more curiosity, and more courage to solve problems together.
That's great. That's great. And you mentioned, one of the things that you hear is, in order to accomplish that, it does take work. I mean, that's the.
It takes us recognizing that we, everybody here, but especially you guys, by the way, meaning every human being, regardless where they are, they need to understand our role and our power, and with the power, the responsibility we have to make this a better world. All the more so with your leaders. The thing that I love about these programs, because it happened to me, is when they give you the honor that they gave you, now you feel that weight on your shoulders. Now you have to deliver. I hope all of you guys feel it, and if not, you will soon start. But like, it's an honor and a responsibility. People are investing in you, and you have to understand that you have to be that light. You have to be those leaders. You have to bring that example to your communities and show people how we can work together to make our communities and our country and our world better. No pressure.
Speaking of Shark Tank dudes, Holly, I'm just sitting here remembering that at the end of our first year with our first class, Mark Cuban was one of our speakers at that last module.
And these poor guys, now we get the schmuck here. They had Mark Cuban, now we get Daniel. Oh, man.
That's not why I brought that up, but.
Yeah, right. No, Mark is incredible. He's like a computer. The guy like processes so fast, because when you do Shark Tank, it's the only place I've ever been to where people think I'm shy. Like, you'd think I talk too much, right? In Shark Tank, after the first recording, I thought I was being so pushy, and the producer's like, Daniel, you need to give more. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm interrupting them all the time. It's like, they edit all that out, but if you don't assert yourself, it's a really, really hard, because everybody's interrupting one another, and it actually requires you to really lean into it and speak loudly because the studio just soaks up all of your energy. It's actually one of the more, the reason I do it is, I love I used to watch it with my kids, or I still do, though they can't stand it anymore. It's like, Dad, please stop. but I enjoy how it teaches kids entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of fun, and I like giving back to entrepreneurs. But also, honestly, it's intellectually challenging to Mark just connects dots so fast, and so you need to really keep up.
That's great. That's great. That's great. All right, well, let's see what questions we have from our group. I'm going to rely on, because of the lights, I'm going to rely on our mic runners to let us know. Okay.
Hi, I'm Mr. Lubetzky. Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Maya, and I had the pleasure of working with you when I led Lady Gaga's Born This Way Foundation. To see you again. So what I love about Kind is that you're making a business case for kindness as well. Everything from what you do with your excess product to your business choices around packaging to the way that your office runs. So can you talk to us a little bit about your choice to both work on the for-profit and the government and the corporate side as a forcing mechanism to build this world that you believe is possible? Because it seems like a very intentional choice. And many of us remain siloed often in our various sectors, and you're one of the leaders who's taken this purposeful approach and applied it across sectors.
I'm just afraid that we only have 22 minutes left. One of my weaknesses is I'm not concise.
You should be here tomorrow.
But
Please, nobody mentioned that I said that to anybody tomorrow.
I think he gets a little bit more license. If you've been president of the United States, you can. First of all, at Kind, because of what happened with Peaceworks, where it became a business that had a social impact by us creating it, I really fell in love with the power of using market forces to channel all those market forces for something positive. Because for the civic initiatives and nonprofit organizations that I started, when I started One Voice, I didn't have that much money, so I had to go around, pass the hat around. It's hard, it's exhausting, it takes a lot of time. The cool thing where you're able to use market forces is you can sustain and scale that growth and that impact. So whenever I can find a way to use market forces and business to drive positive change, that's my preference. But it's not always possible. There's many, many things that require you to create a civic nonprofit initiative. The way I approach things is I've always thought about, like, what is the problem that keeps me up at night? How are we going to solve it? And then many times my team says, Daniel, somebody's already solving it. And many times they're right, and many times they're not. And so what I say, okay, fine, you're right, let's do the landscape study and the competitive analysis, whether we should do something or somebody else is doing it. If they're already doing it, that's amazing, let's support them, let's partner with them. But when it hasn't done, then we're like, okay, how are we going to solve the problem? And let's create a solution. And for me, the not-for-profit, for-profit thing is partly our tax system created a little bit of that rigidity, but in our minds, we just need to say, what do we need to do? What's a creative solution out of there? So if government can be the partner and we can leverage the strength of government, if it's the private sector, if it's the public sector, if it's the nonprofit sector, for me, that comes so secondary to first trying to think about the problem and then understand what are the assumptions underlying why people think that's an intractable solution, and challenge those assumptions, because oftentimes those assumptions are actually false. And if you challenge those assumptions, you can create transformative change. Now, I'll give you a silly example, because Kind obviously is not going to solve all the problems in society, but Kind, the assumption in my industry was that you could not make something that was healthy and tasty at the same time. It had to be or. And by using more healthful ingredients and leading with nutrient-dense ingredients in everything we made, we ended up coming up with something that's healthy and tasty and wholesome and convenient and socially impactful and economically sustainable. But it's isolating the assumptions and understanding why hasn't been done, what are the assumptions, and then like really thinking critically about them. And then once you find a false assumption, thinking creatively about how can you then create an unlock. Same with the One Voice movement. When it was 2001, 2002, had been running Peaceworks. See, I told you I'm going to talk too long. But it's a really good story.
Keep going.
So I had run Peaceworks for many years. I started in 1993. In the year 2000, I was so excited about a breakthrough the Camp David negotiations with President Clinton guided. And then in the summer of 2000 and in the fall of 2000, from that hope comes a horrible despair at seeing a breakout of enormous violence. And I could spend a lot of time analyzing, but let's just say I'm depressed as hell. I'm like, my parents are like, you know, you're a Mexican Jewish lawyer, the first person to like go to college, let alone law school in our family. Now you're selling sun-dried tomato spreads on the streets, and there's all this war. And I was just like asking myself whether I was living a lie, because why did I leave all of my potential cushy law firm jobs to sell sun-dried tomato spreads down the street? And I really was asking myself if I was living a lie. And along the way, my partner said, Daniel, this is about our lives. We cannot give up. We need to work on it. And then I decided to go back to the region to understand why this had happened. And because the news that I was watching, all that I saw was Palestinians as terrorists. Every Palestinian from what I saw was a terrorist. And I went to my Palestinian partners and I said, dude, what happened? Like, where did all you go? And they got very upset at me. It's like, what are you talking about? Where did all of your people go? And I'm like, what do you mean they're all my people? All my people are there. It's like, let us show. And I told them about what I was watching on the news. They said, let us show you what we're watching. And they showed me Al Manar television and Al Jazeera television and Al Arabiya television. And the images were the exact opposite. Every image was just of Israelis. And at that point, I realized that the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians, they're moderates. And I need to use your book for my chart here. But you have Israelis here and you have Palestinians here, and they're all moderates, or the vast majority, but they don't see the other side because there's physical and virtual walls. And the only thing they see is the things that rise to get media attention and social media attention, which tends to be the most grotesque extremities from each side. So each side starts thinking that these people represent the other side. Thank you so much. And so that's how we created the One Voice movement. And we ended up building a grassroots movement of moderates standing against extremism. But when I was starting this, again, I was out of New York City, a confused Mexican Jewish guy selling sun-dried tomato spreads. And I went around trying to build this movement, and everybody rejected me. I had $16,000 when I started One Voice, and even the president of the former dean of my law school, who was then the president of the Hewlett Foundation, said, dude, go do something else. You have no qualification to do this. But I did it because I had no other option. And in fact, to be very honest about this, I initially gave up. I tried and I couldn't raise the money for it, and I gave up. And then one night, I opened the news, and there was the news of a attack in Netanya, a terrorist attack, where hundreds of Jewish families had been killed in a Passover dinner. And I saw the news again talking about the us versus them, how, you know, all the news that I saw were reported were like the us versus them methodology. Nobody was talking about those teachers that I knew, those business people that I knew, those farmers that I knew on the other side. Each side was just hearing the worst of the other. And I realized that I was living a lie perpetrated by then media, today also social media. And that's how I decided to just start it one at a time. And I reached out to my friend Mohammed Daraushe, and we created One Voice, and we made a ton of mistakes, but it became what it's today, which is the largest grassroots movement in Israel and Palestine.
That's a powerful story. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Yosh Miller, and thank you so much, Mr. Lubetzky, for being here. I followed you, and you're a big source of inspiration. And I'm also a first-time founder, and I'm about to kick off my seed round next month, so I'm passing around the hat.
Send us the deck.
Yeah. But I had a question in mind, but then I have a follow-up question. So the question in mind was, what do you look for and partners or entrepreneurs, aside from the forecast models, the product market fit, like what's the secret sauce or the...
Self-reflection. Self-reflection. The most important thing that's missing, particularly for younger generations, I think all of you guys in your generation should have a little bit more of it, but every one of us is failing at this, including me, because we're developing such bad habits, right? We have our devices. It used to be when I was walking through, going from where I was to my school, I had to walk for 20 minutes, and I had to talk to myself. Mm-hmm. I was forced to talk to myself. I didn't have these devices. Today, all of us, every freaking second, we're checking our WhatsApp, our Schmatzap, our this, or that. and it robs us of the ability to talk to ourselves. It's so important to talk to ourselves and to think, what did we do wrong? Like Danielle can tell you, we were in a Starts With Us call. I started chewing them out because I felt that they were doing things wrong, and I brought the team down because I didn't have the patience to listen, like I didn't listen to the end of your question. But then I realized, what a jerk, and I apologized. But I think, we need to have the humility to understand that we're all very imperfect, and to just, the way we improve as human beings is by having self-reflection. For me, that's the most important skill set that I'm trying to teach my kids, that I'm trying to teach myself, and that I want team members of mine to have, and partners of ours. Because you can grow if you have self-reflection. Was that your question or no?
Yeah, that was the question I had in mind. And then the follow-on question was, when you were talking about building enterprises that uses the market forces to do more good, how do you approach when the institutions that are the incumbent institutions in those markets don't allow those market forces to permeate? How do you go? I know we talked about challenging assumptions one by one, finding partners, but what are your methodologies, or what's your approach for tackling the incumbent institutions when they don't let the market forces?
Well, let's first, I want to connect it in a couple of ways. First of all, it is very important that when you have a social mission, it be authentic. Not every business has to have a social mission. I think it's very special. It gives me more meaning. It gives me more fighting force. When I have a passion, where I have a purpose, I think it gives you the more chance to not give up against the challenges that you will face. I think there's a lot of benefits, but it has to be authentic. If it is authentic, consumers are going to appreciate it. So if you have a social mission and the incumbents don't, I think it gives you something very special and differentiable that I do think people will appreciate. It cannot be a crutch. Your product has to win on its own merits, meaning a kind bar has to be more delicious and more nutritious. People are not going to buy it because we foster kindness and donate and try to encourage people to be kind to one another. But if you win on the merits, and it's more delicious, more nutritious, the right value proposition, and on top of it, you care authentically and deeply about making this a better world, then you create much more loyalty to your product or brand. So I think if the incumbents don't have a social mission and you authentically have one, I think that's a potential. But if you're asking more deeply about how do you fend off incumbents, I think we need a couple hours afterwards to talk about your industry.
Hello, Daniel. My name is Tia Suzuki. I'm part of the class of 2019. So last night, I attended an event that was hosted by the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and it was a Hope for Humanity event where an honoree was honored for his work. And there was a great quote in the program by Albert Einstein, which is, "We live in a very dangerous world, but not because of the evildoers, but because of the people who are not doing anything about it." So I loved your comments about the 86% and how too many of us are passive. When we see something wrong, we don't say anything about it, we don't do anything about it. How do we strengthen our muscle to be better upstanders when we are seeing something that's not right? And then also, how do we bring others along?
Remind me to share something else when I'm done.
Okay.
Because I want to answer your question first. I think the most important thing is for everybody in our community, everybody here and beyond, to remember every single day in how we treat every single human being, we're having an impact. The overwhelming majority of our culture is not made up of this one statement or this one action. It's made up of the million moments that we have throughout our lives. So if you are a kind person, if you live your life with compassion, curiosity, and courage, if you're respectful to others, if you smile to people, if you just have humanity inside you and you let that be your guiding light, you're already changing the world. I think we need to remember that for ourselves and to share that message with everybody else. Then on top, and we need to remind people that how we behave will already make a difference. That's the most important thing. Not develop all those bad habits. For me, it's not just the importance of standing up, it's how we stand up. Because the hardest thing is to have compassion towards those different from us. After the Hamas massacre, I was so horrified by seeing that violence. And my community of Jewish people were horrified by that. And you see the natural tribal inclination to protect your own people. But it's so essential that we have empathy also for our Muslim partners. That kid in Chicago, I think it was a 9-year-old Palestinian, Arab kid, Muslim kid that got murdered by his landlord. That is horrible. And I think it's really important that we have empathy, particularly for those that we might not be thinking that we should have empathy for. It's really, really important to build bridges before demonizing, to partner with those that we think are on the other side. Because that's what it's going to take. If all we needed to do is protect the freedoms of those whose opinions we agree with, or to have empathy for those likable people, it wouldn't be so hard. But it's hard because we need to build bridges with the other. And we need to try to find the humanity and connect with them. And remember that superintendent. Remember that guy that was not a good human being, but found his humanity at that moment. If we dehumanize one another, if we judge, if we other, if we judge down, if we speak down, I just don't think we solve it. So it's really developing those empathy skills that President Bush was talking about. That's a real challenge. It's not easy, and it's really important. I want to tell you something else. Your last name is Suzuki. Are you of Japanese origin? Oh, your husband.
I'm from Cambodia.
I'm from Cambodia. I want to tell you, when I talk about how my father was liberated by American soldiers from the Dachau concentration camp, everybody's image of who were those American soldiers, they imagine that it was white soldiers. It happens to be the case that the most highly decorated battalions were black and Japanese Americans. And when the Allied army was approaching, the Nazis implemented what they wanted to be the final solution. They started walking thousands of inmates towards a cliff because they didn't have enough bullets to kill them, so they were going to push them off a cliff. And they started walking all these inmates without shoes, without coats in the winter. And eventually a very strong winter storm overtook everything. And the Nazis kept walking away because they wanted to walk away from the Allied army that was advancing, and they thought these guys are just going to die. And the snowstorm covered everybody, and my father and my grandfather hugged each other, and they said goodbye to each other. But their warmth created kind of like an igloo, and the following morning they dug out of the snow, and they looked at each other, and the Germans were gone. And they started walking back into a village because they were starving. They were really hungry, so they were trying to look for food. And as they were walking, they saw these tanks approaching, and they're like, oh no, there's the Nazis again. But it wasn't, it was the Americans. But when they came out of those tanks, they were Japanese Americans. And my dad had never seen an Asian American, and he was, what the hell is this? And the people that saved my father's life were Japanese Americans whose families were being interned. They were being kept in separate camps because of the fear that they were not being loyal to America, while these heroes were the most highly decorated soldiers. And 70 years later, I was at a kind meeting when I got a phone call from a friend, and they're like, do you know Larry Lubetzky? And I'm like, yeah, that was my uncle. It's like, I'm talking to this gentleman, Dr. Sue, who was by then a highly decorated Harvard physician. And he was the captain that had liberated 70 years before my family, Sue Ito. And he was a captain, then 26 years old. By now he was, 70 years later, 96 years old. And he had liberated my family. And my uncle, who was a little older than my dad, had attached himself to that American battalion as a translator, and they became friends, exchanged notes for many years to come. Then they lost contact, and then I connected to him. He sadly passed away months later, and I brought my son. My father's name was Roman. I named my son after him. And my son Roman was able to go to the memorial for Dr. Suito with his family and thank him for the courage that his dad had had to risk his life to liberate a continent.
Wow. We have time for one more question. Who we got back here in the back?
Hi, Mr. Lubetzky. I just want to say this has been a complete honor, sir. Really.
Me too, and I say it sincerely to all of you. I'm so energized to meet all of you, and I'm very grateful for you guys investing your time to be here and to commit to one another that you're going to challenge yourselves to build this better country.
Yes. And so my name is Aisha Miller, and I work in finance and strategy, right? And I consider myself a passionate builder, even more so after being in PLS. Like I'm sick right now at work, right? Just from being in PLS and getting stronger. So the question I have is, how do you weather the hits? Because when you're a passionate builder, you're going to get some hits. You're going to get things happening to you. It's going to get difficult. It's going to get really challenging, especially the closer you get to your goal. So I'd love for you to talk about being a leader and weathering those hits and staying the course no matter how bad it looks, especially being in finance. So, but in other fields, I just want to talk about that.
Aisha, time's run out, so I have to go. I think for me, I have at least 3 tools. Number 1, keep perspective. It could always be worse. Like, just think about the suffering in our world. Just keep perspective. It really can always be worse. Just really remember the suffering from others in the past and in the present, and just keep perspective. The second one is surround yourself with people that bring positive energy, that are doers, that want to bring light to the world, that have a positive force. Surround yourself with loved ones. Like for me, my greatest secret is hugging my wife and my kids. When I had setbacks at Kind and we would lose an account or something really bad happened, which when you're an entrepreneur, like every high is a high and every low is a low and you think the world's going to end, just hugging your kids and seeing them love you no matter what, I think it's just an incredible, so make sure you're close to your friends, make sure you're close to your family, lean in on them when you need to, don't shy away from that human contact. And then the third thing, and very, very important, is find purpose. Find something that gives you meaning. It might be that company that you're making is just a great place to work with and for. It might be that you are pursuing a mission. But just find something that really gives you purpose and meaning, because when you do, like we're speaking earlier, it gives you more of that staying power.
Terrific. You know, the last 9 years of my career have been the most blessed of my life, in part because every year we invite 60 new participants into our program, because we stay connected to all of the alumni who are now almost 480 strong. And because every year I get the opportunity to sit down and visit with people who really get it and are willing to share their advice and their inspiration with others. Daniel Lubetzky, I thank you very much for joining us today. Daniel Lubetzky, everyone.